I'm Sarah, welcome back to my channel. I'm going to be telling you about the books I read for the month of November. So this month I'm kind of introducing something a little new for you guys and a little new for me, and that was audiobooks. Midnight Sun, of all things, was kind of my introduction to audiobooks, strictly because I was reading that book because I challenged myself to read it for stupid reasons. There's a whole video about it, go watch. And Midnight Sun turned out to be the longest thing I've ever had to trudge through in my entire life. So my way of dealing with that at a time in my life where I don't have a ton of extra free time to just be reading a terrible book was I started listening to it on audiobook. I don't want to get dramatic and refer to it as my cross to bear in this world or anything, but it felt like it some days, it really did. But what I can thank Midnight Sun for is introducing me to the idea of audiobooks. It's not like this was some foreign idea to me. Obviously, I've heard of audiobooks. And in general, I don't really listen to music on my car rides. I prefer to listen to podcasts or talk radio, like NPR, that type of thing. But I just never really did audiobooks because kind of the experience for me, what I'm getting out of books is the act of reading. I don't know, it's weird. But I decided to try out audiobooks because I got put on another rotation, and on this rotation I had an hour commute each way, and I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with myself. So I downloaded some audiobooks. And I was kind of going with my podcast, because I like those murder podcast type things. So I tried to find an audiobook that was about a murder, and they didn't quite work out, but I'll get to that. But I did listen to a couple audiobooks this month, and those are on my list. So in total, I have 8 books this month. I never know whether to start with my favorite and then go to my least favorite, or my least favorite to my favorite, the opposite. Leave a comment down below, tell me which way you think's better. But I guess this month I'll just start with my favorite, because that's kind of what I feel like talking about. My favorite is Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. I read this book because my husband came in here and looked at all my stacks of books, and the first one I think he picked out was Just Mercy because he recognized the title because we watched the movie together. And I purchased the book with every intention of reading it, but you know how TBRs go. You know how, you can see what's happened to me. I have a whole other video about that too. But I love Just Mercy. It's really well written. It has a lot of important information that I think is good for everybody to read. It is a book that I feel like I came away from it having learned things and now understanding better the death penalty, and in particular how I feel about the death penalty, because that is something I've gone back and forth on over the years, and my opinions have kind of swayed wildly. And this book just kind of solidified, I think, how I feel about this after years of just being kind of indecisive and wishy-washy about the whole thing. And the main story is about a man who is on death row for a murder he didn't commit, but we do look at guilty people too. We do look at guilty people on death row and how they got there and why they deserve mercy too. And it's complicated. I know it's complicated. I have never shed a tear for Ted Bundy. I never will. But the way the death penalty has been applied in history, it does not justify its existence. It doesn't. There's a lot of questions to be asked about what we are doing to ourselves by killing these people. Even if they are murderers, even if they are the worst of the worst, what is that doing to us as a society that we kill them and that we want to kill them? So this is a great book. It reminds me, the way I feel about it anyway, reminds me of another book I read earlier this year, Know My Name by Chanel Miller. They're nonfiction books telling very important stories that are also just well written, and I don't want to say enjoyable to read because they both deal with some pretty strong subject matter, but the writing is very strong and could stand on its own even without the powerful subject matter, if that makes sense. I think a lot of these books sometimes get 5 stars because the information is so important, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but Just Mercy and Know My Name, both these books are important stories that everybody should read, but also the writing is just good. So that was my one 5-star book. I have a few 4 stars. I think my favorite is probably the Sundown Motel. This is one of my friends picked for me to read kind of as a long distance book club, and I'm glad she did because it was good. I enjoyed it. This is a mystery thriller with a paranormal twist to it. There's ghosts. It's not my preferred way of doing ghosts. If you read Riley Sager, Lock Every Door, what is it, the haunted house one? Home Before Dark. That's kind of the way I prefer a mystery thriller with ghosts, where For a lot of the book anyway, you don't know if there's really ghosts or not, and you're finding out. It doesn't really matter to me which way it goes, if there's ghosts or not. But Sundown Motel is not like that. Sundown Motel, very early in this book, so I'm not giving you any spoilers. The ghosts are just out there dancing around, being like, woo, woo, we are ghosts. And I will say, like, the main character's reactions to this, like I would be gone. Wouldn't you just be like real gone? And they're just like, oh, there's ghosts here. Go hang out with this ghost. The one character in particular. Vivian is in 1982. She comes to this hotel. She works at this hotel. She completely disappears. She's like she's not a runaway because she's like in her 20s, but she's randomly ended up in this new place, and she's working this job at this hotel for minimum wage, and she's seeing all these ghosts, and she doesn't leave. Like, there's literally nothing tying her to this area or to this hotel. But there's really nothing tying her to the area either. She hasn't been there that long, like a couple months. She doesn't have any friends. There's zero reason. She just didn't peace out the first second she saw a ghost. But whatever, irrelevant. Side-by-side story is in 2017, her niece, Carly, has come back to this area to try and find out what happened to her Aunt Vivian and why she disappeared 35 years ago. So Vivian is present day, disappeared, and Carly has come back to this area and is trying to find out what happened to her, and she gets literally the exact same job at the exact same hotel and is living in the exact same apartment. And that was kind of one of the weaker points of the book, was sometimes it was hard to keep track what was Vivian's story and what was Carly, because they're happening side by side even though they're 35 years apart, living in the exact same apartment, each with a roommate, working the exact same job, seeing the same ghosts. It's hard to remember who knows what and who's getting what information and what's happening in each story sometimes. It was a little weak sometimes, and like they didn't really feel like separate characters. And also, it's just not my preferred way of doing ghosts, because I almost feel like they're less scary when they're just out there, and it's less believable that people stick around when they know they've seen ghosts. Like, there's no question about it. They don't think they're crazy. They're just like, that's a ghost. But whatever, I'm cool with it. I'm cool. It's cool. Overall, good book though. I enjoyed the story. So the first audiobook that I listened to in full, only on audiobook, I did not read this in paper, was Under the Banner of Heaven by Jon Krakauer. I've read 2 Jon Krakauer books in the past, Into Thin Air and Into the Wild, I think. Yeah. Liked both of those. I think they were probably both 4 stars for me as well. So I like Jon Krakauer, and I thought for an audiobook, you know, a nonfiction story would be easier for me. And I was trying to find like a murder story, because it's about this murder in the 80s of a woman by these Mormon men. But what the book actually is like a history of Mormonism, and it's specifically its history of violence, the history of violence in Mormonism. Like, once I accepted that that was what the book was about, it was much more enjoyable, but I did not go into it thinking that's what it was, and so it took me a little bit to be like, oh, okay, this is the book I'm listening to. So the book, what it was, 4 stars, solid story, very informative, good book. But it actually was not what I was quite looking for, so I was a little disappointed there. But that didn't affect my rating. I'd say it's overall 4 stars. There is some messed up shit in Mormon history. The Meadow Massacre, something Meadows Massacre. I looked this up in another book that I had because I was like, this happened? I went online and stuff. It's ridiculous. What is it called? I'll like put it up on the screen or something. Something Meadows Massacre. It's this Mormon, it is messed up. If you want to go down a rabbit hole, you can go look that up yourself. But a lot of messed up stuff in this book. Just the marriages, the young girls, you know, 14, 15-year-old girls being married to like 50, 60-year-old men. The way these communities get so intertwined, where it's like your brother is married to the sister of your husband, and then your father married their aunt. This one woman was like going through her own family tree, and it was like one of those, she was her own grandmother things. Like, it's ridiculous. Apparently they keep very close track of the records of who's married to who because of this, and they don't want incest or whatever. Oh, and I should say specifically, this is like focusing on fundamentalist Mormonisms, not your run-of-the-mill non-polygamous Mormonisms. It's mostly on the fundamentalist ones. Although, historically, these groups were more or less one and the same. It's a good book if you're interested in any of that. And then I read Runaway by Harlan Coben. This was my first Harlan Coben. I enjoyed it. I did like it. This was another one my husband picked for me. It was good. It kept me entertained the entire way. It was just it was 4 stars for me because there wasn't really a big twist. It's kind of Like, the story comes to you pretty linear. I do respect the way he is willing to just kill people off. It raises the stakes when you're reading a book by an author like that, and you know that even like a main character could die at any time. It was a little dark for me, the ending. I respect it. It's just, it was dark. It was dark. This is about a father who is investigating this disappearance of his daughter, and his daughter's a drug addict. He and his wife are like these successful, wealthy New Yorkers, and they sent their daughter away to college, and she ended up addicted to drugs, like hardcore, homeless, just dark stuff. And he is trying to rescue his daughter from this world, and he gets dragged into it. More specifically, he gets dragged down this path of not what you would expect. You would think about this would be about him going into like this world of drug addiction and drug dealing and everything, and that's not it. His daughter had gotten involved in something else unexpected. And I don't want to go into too much detail because that's part of the fun of the book, is finding out what all that is. But it's good. It's interesting. A lot of the story there has ties to something kind of personal to me, which unfortunately I can't really tell you about because that would be like spoiling the book. For me in particular, it was quite interesting, the implications of what he's looking into. But it was good, fast-paced read. Everything ties up neatly, which some people don't like that. Some people like things to be more loose-ended and mysterious. I like a mystery where everything ties together with a neat little bow, and that's the story. And this one did that, so I'd recommend this one. I'm considering reading more of his books. There are a ton. Like, there's a lot. Like, I think he puts out at least 1 or 2 a year. I've watched 1.5 Netflix series that were based on his books, and I definitely can see from the series that I finished, The Stranger, I can see how that story could have been based on one of his books just from reading the book. Like, even though it wasn't the same story. Like, 100 Days of Cake is my one. I originally gave it 4 stars. It might be 3 stars. I haven't decided. I know that sounds weird, but I liked this book. I enjoyed reading it. I think it's a good look at a teen with depression. It shows her struggle. It really shows her struggle with like not being able to care about anything. And that's one of the symptoms of depression people don't really talk about, is you just lose interest in the things that you loved. And I feel like most people just think it's like you're just sad all the time. And that's certainly part of it. Certainly you can be sad with depression. But this one really talks about like the lack of interest, the sleeping all day, just some of the things I feel like, especially in young adult books, are not talked about, and that young people might not recognize or relate to as symptoms of depression. So I think it was a good book in that aspect, and it was enjoyable to read, but there was just something that happens in the book. And skip ahead if you'd like to read the book and you don't want spoilers. So Molly is having this inappropriate relationship with her therapist, and it starts off not physical, just like them watching movies together and him like coming to her house, and then it just becomes physical. It was bad before. It was like, this guy is questionable. And then it actually becomes like physical, like they make out and stuff, and he gives her alcohol, and it's just like, oh, this guy should definitely lose his license. He even says he's gonna lose his license. The story just ends with him moving away to a different city, and Molly never reports him, and she even at one point says like, oh, should I feel bad? Like, what if he's doing this to another girl, and just ignores it all? And I'm not saying that's not a realistic portrayal of what could actually happen in that situation, but I question the motives behind that being the resolution of this story in a young adult book. I feel like it's sending the message to young adult readers that, oh, it wasn't really that big of a deal that she was like making out with her therapist. That would be kind of a big deal even if she was an adult. Like, that's questionable there, because of the power dynamic and the relationship between a therapist and their patient. But this is a 17-year-old girl and a man in his 30s. And it's just like, that's kind of been stuck in my head about this novel. Like, I feel like I could never recommend this to a teen with depression because of that. It's a shame because I liked the writing and I liked the story. I really did. Except for that aspect of it. And I think the author just kind of wanted to like wrap things up and didn't want to deal with the mess that would be, like the legal mess and all the ramifications of if Molly had come out and told everyone about what her therapist did. But just the message it's sending by that being the resolution, I have a lot of problems with it. And then I read this kind of random thriller called Something in the Water. And This one was only 3 stars for me, and it's hard for me to give it that rating because I really did enjoy it so much. It's about this couple that find basically this giant bag of money. They want to keep this giant bag of money, as you know, we all would. There's a lot of things that I liked about this book that I don't know if other people would like. Kind of, they go through like the tedium of all of that, like how you'd make sure the money was safe and taxes, that type of thing, which I actually really liked. And I also liked, like, there's these shopping sprees with like at like Chanel with like all the money. I like that thing. They're on this really decadent honeymoon where they're describing all the decadent things about this hotel and the food, and I just like that, flying first class. I love that type of thing. I don't know if other people necessarily would, but I was really into the story up until that point, and it just let me down at the ending. I like a twist, but the twist has to come from somewhere and it has to feel justified. And in this book, it did not. I didn't like it. It never had a good explanation for it. Just didn't do it for me in terms of the ending. So 3 stars. Really liked it while I was reading it. Was really enthralled, loving it, and then just it didn't stick the ending. I finally read The Lying Game, which was the last of the Ruth Wares that I had not yet read, and it was kind of, I wasn't into it. I liked it while I was reading it, but as I'm reading, like, certain things that happened, I was just like, why would this happen? Why would anyone do this? Why would these be the choices that someone would make? I can buy some outrageous stuff, but this one just, it fell flat. And I like the idea. It's this girl group. They were friends in school, like a boarding school, and now they're all like in their early 30s, I think. It's like my age. I like that. And they've got this dark secret about something that happened. They covered up when they were teenagers, threatening to come out, and they're getting back together to try and prevent that. Setup was great, but the mystery just didn't hold up for me. It's hard to talk about these ones that where I don't like the resolution of the mysteries without like just saying what happened, because I don't want to do that, because it's not terrible. Like, this is a decent book to read, but I didn't buy the story. I didn't buy the explanation behind the mystery and explanation. Like, there's just certain things that happened that just came out of nowhere, and I just didn't buy it. This might be my least favorite Ruth Ware, because the story didn't hold up for me, but it didn't have like any really fun settings like The Woman in Cabin 10 or One by One did. Like, those ones were kind of saved by like the skiing setting or the luxury cruise setting that I had a lot of fun with. This one just kind of really fell flat. It might be my least favorite by her. I'm sorry, Ruth Ware. I'm sorry. You're still a goddess and I love a lot of your books, but not this one. And then I listened to another audiobook during my commute. This one was The Great Influenza, and it's about the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918-1919. My problem with this book was not enough pandemic. Like, pandemic does not start until you have like hours of listening to this audiobook. There's a lot about the history of medicine and what was going on in the field of medicine and with doctors. And it's not terribly uninteresting, but it's not the book I signed up for. And we spend a lot of time learning about these doctors, and there's just no payoff for it, in my opinion. Like, the one guy, his name was Welch or something, like the first one he's talked about the most. So I'm like, oh, he's gonna do something big once the pandemic happened. That's why we're spending so much time on him. And then literally he gets influenza and he's down and out for the count super fucking early. Like, I kept waiting for him to make this comeback and do something important to justify all of the time we had previously spent on him, and we don't. For the most part, it's just these male doctors that the author spends all this time giving all this background, and not just background, but like where they all end up after the influenza too. There was no cure found for influenza. None of these men were able to actually do anything when the influenza was happening. So I don't know why there was so much about them. I wanted to know much more about like individual struggles of people like on the ground during the influenza, like those doctors. These guys were like research scientists trying to find a cure, which is all well and good, except like they didn't. Like, obviously we still don't even have a cure for influenza. And at this point they didn't even know what caused influenza. They thought it was a bacteria. So they were really off the mark. They did not even solve this during this pandemic. So don't understand why there's so much background of these scientists. There's a couple parts in the book where it's like briefly touched on how women would have been, you know, in existence and important also during this influenza. I think there's like this women's society that was trying to help everybody in Philadelphia, and he just like briefly mentions it and then just brushes right over it. There's a lot of good information in this book. It wasn't terrible to listen to. It just was not what I was going for. I will say though, a lot of the stuff, like listening to it today about things like the masks and the author's predictions, I think it was like in 2011. I don't know if that was when the book was published or just when he wrote like this special afterword, but where he talks about, you know, the next global pandemic and how it's going to be a respiratory virus and how we're ill prepared and we don't have enough ventilators, we don't have enough doctors, etc., etc. Kelly, no. Listen to me. My fat cat is rubbing up against my phone stand. So that's what that little earthquake you saw was. But he makes all these predictions about the next pandemic, and listening to it while in the midst of said pandemic, like it was fun. Fun, that's such a word to use. It was interesting. The author's clearly very knowledgeable about these things, but the route he took to write this book, or like where he decided to put his focus, is just not for me. So that's it. Let me know in the comments if you read any of these books and what you thought about them. If you think I got things right, make sure and give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't, and thanks for watching.